Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam,
And I'm Marcia.
and we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we are talking about the movie A Call to Spy, which came out in 2019. It was directed by Lydia Dean Pilcher and written and produced by Sarah Megan Thomas, who also acts in it, and she portrays Virginia Hall. It's based on the true story of Special Operations Executive Spy Master Vera Atkins and Special Agents Virginia Hall and Noor Inayat Khan, who were stationed in France during World War II. What did you think of this movie?
I have some mixed feelings about this movie because I'd never heard of it before, and I found it online, and I was like, oh, this is cool. This is all about spy ladies. I was like, yes, finally. And then I watched the movie, and it's fine. It's just kind of, the movie making is kind of average. It follows more or less three storylines, and it feels almost like it should be a limited series, but it's only a movie, so I feel like the stories weren't fully fledged, and also there wasn't a whole lot of depth to it. But it did make me research a whole lot, so that's good. How about you?
Yeah, I thought it kind of had the same problem as The Pacific, where they're trying to tell three separate plot lines and maybe they're not doing them justice. Especially, I found the newer plot line got a bit sidelined in favor of the Virginia plot line. And they're all super fascinating women and honestly could probably have their own movie or, as you said, their own miniseries. So yeah, I thought it was fine, like you said. And anytime I see a movie like this and I'm like, I wonder why I haven't heard of it, I'm like, I bet there's a reason. And yeah, it's one of those ones where I really wanted it to be good, and it's fine. It's all right. I don't like wait for my time back or anything. And like you said, it did lead me down some fun rabbit holes. So there is that.
I think I might watch it again, just because I did all the research before and then watched it. But I did a bunch more research afterwards, and I just maybe want to see what they did and didn't do. And also there's a thing, and then I'll shut up and we can get into it, but there's something about the music. Like, the production value is pretty high, like, production design is beautiful, and the acting is fine, but the music feels like very Lifetime-y to me. I don't know why, but it does.
Yeah, I'll buy that for sure.
All right, let's get into the plot.
We've got some opening cards. France falls to the Nazis. Britain stands alone. Winston Churchill hastily creates a spy agency to disrupt the Nazi war machine. Its mission in France? Place spies everywhere to build resistance and conduct sabotage. But there are no experienced spies for this new type of warfare. A call must go out to amateurs. The first few are dropped behind enemy lines to begin a secret war, inspired by true stories.
It's a long opening card, for sure. And the font is weird in this. It looks like it was done by my 15-year-old cousin.
Sometimes I find the opening and closing cards we get in these movies are not strictly necessary because you're about to find out the same information in the movie. I don't know that this provided necessarily context that we couldn't have picked up on in the first few scenes, but I mean, it was there, so I guess it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I feel like you're right. They do a whole lot of exposition during the first 15 minutes of the movie, and most of it's in there, so you're right. But, I mean, it is a World War II movie, and they usually have opening cards, so maybe it's just a trope that can't be untroped.
How do I get hired to write the opening and closing cards for World War II movies?
Yeah. So the movie starts in earnest. We see it is August 1941. American SOE agent Virginia Hall, played by Sarah Megan Thomas, is being tortured by German officers, but won't reveal her real name. She calls herself Brigitte. Virginia Hall was pretty legendary. She was infamous amongst the Germans, who called her the limping lady. We'll figure out why in a minute. And the most dangerous of all Allied agents. I do wonder why. But she was the first female agent to operate in Vichy, France. And she worked across Europe in various American embassies throughout the 1930s. And she also volunteered as an ambulance driver for the French army prior to the fall of France in 1940, so she got around.
Yeah, I think because it's trying to tell so many plot lines, this movie doesn't necessarily give her justice. I read a biography of her called A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell a couple of years ago. And it's really hard to express how much she was really the crux around which a huge amount of Allied intelligence rotated on the continent. This woman had her fingers in so many pies. She was involved in so many projects on the ground. She organized fighter groups. Right at the end of the war, she was in the Austrian mountains organizing resistance groups against the Germans. She was heavily, heavily involved. And at one point in the war, she was actually the most wanted Allied agent. The Germans were dying to catch her.
Yeah, what made me laugh when I read about her was, obviously they call her the limping lady. She has a prosthetic leg and she limps, but later she dressed up as an old woman as her disguise, so they wouldn't suspect her as much. And just, it's so smart.
Yeah, she would literally go up to the Germans disguised as an old woman and sell them cheese that she had made. And she would use that opportunity to eavesdrop on their conversations. This woman was fearless. She would do anything.
How easy would it have been for her to just be caught in that moment? She's always so close.
Yeah, it's wild. The book really takes you through. She just spent such a long period of time and she was never safe. She was always on the move. Even when she was putting her head down at night in a place where she knew the people and she should have been safe, she knew that she might have to get up in the night and move. She couldn't stay in one place because the Germans would catch her. And it just seems like such an immensely stressful life. And she just took to it like a duck to water.
Yeah, I wonder, I don't know if you remember from the book, but do we know specifically why she joined the SOE?
Well, she wanted to be a diplomat. That was her whole thing. That was her lifetime dream. And she applied 3 or 4 times, I think, to the diplomatic service, and she kept getting rejected. And she worked in several embassies across Europe. And then when she got, pretty much as it happens in the movie, she was approached at a party by Vera Atkins. And Vera was like, do you want to actually put your skills to good use and be taken seriously? And she was really interested in that.
I do like I guess we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little, but I do like the little letter we see her write about how just because she has a disability doesn't mean she can't be useful. And I felt that.
Yeah, she genuinely did write to FDR as well. This woman was, she was not afraid to go over someone's head.
She's like me, just writing to all the actors.
Yeah, exactly. Well, flashback to 3 months earlier at the SOE HQ, F section in London. The leader of the French section of the SOE, his name is Maurice Buckmaster. He's played by Linus Roach. He's meeting with his right-hand people to discuss the difficulty in keeping radio operators alive. It's a super, super dangerous job. Basically, what they would do is you'd have an entire circuit of agents operating in France, collaborating with the resistance, and you might have one radio operator or two. And the problem is that the Germans were getting really, really good at tracking down the signal of these radio operators. And so they could find you within 20 minutes. So if you're trying to transmit information from your circuit back to London, you had to tap out this message and then you had to get the fuck out of there. And they had these aerials that they had to put out because this is the technology at the time, right? These big transmitters, and they would have to try and disguise them as clotheslines or disguise them in a tree. But it's like a 70-foot aerial that you have to hide. And they reached a point where it was so dangerous, the Germans were getting so good at finding them that they were like, okay, well, we're not going to transmit where we sleep anymore. So that means you have to go out into a park or a public place and find somewhere to hide your aerial, transmit, and then fuck off. And you can't use the same place twice. And so these people had crazy, crazy dangerous jobs. They were constantly getting picked up by the Germans and disappeared. So that's kind of where they're at right now. In a lot of places, they're having difficulty maintaining connections with their circuits because they can't keep radio operators alive. And we get introduced to Vera Atkins, played by Stana Katic. She's one of our main characters. And she gets assigned to recruit women to their cause. Women are obviously going to be a little bit more inconspicuous, more likely to be underestimated, perhaps. And there was also a sense, I think, that women, especially at the time, and the way they move through the world, had to be a bit more observant, had to be a bit more aware of danger or how they were coming off to other people or how to smooth things over, how not to make waves. So a lot of people did see the value in having female agents. So she's sent out to recruit female agents. And one of the other agents said to her, make sure they're pretty.
Yeah, this line, man, I don't know. I really like Linus Roach as Maurice Buckmaster. I thought he was fantastic in this. It's nice to see kind of a man take a back seat to his second and take it with grace instead of just being offended all the time by it. So I did kind of like it. But you're right. Women were underestimated, even by Maurice Buckmaster at the beginning. He was like, I don't know, but let's try. We have no other options. So, I don't know. I did really like this part. Obviously, because we've seen Vera before, she's also portrayed in Carve Her Name with Pride, where she served as a recruiter and mentor, a friend of the pod, Viola Zabo. So that was really cool. And real Vera actually consulted on the movie, and I did not know this. Pretty cool.
Vera was a cool lady. She was a multilingual Jewish Romanian woman who was recruited before the war by Canadian spy master Sir William Stevenson. And he was actually the inspiration for James Bond. And if we talk about X Company in a few episodes, we'll talk more about him as well, because he was also the founder of Camp X in Ontario that trained a lot of these agents, or kind of in their initial training stage. And he recruited her to do recon in Europe before the war about the rising fascist threat. She joined the SOE in 1941, and she became indispensable to Colonel Buckmaster. Unfortunately, because she was a foreigner, because she was Jewish, because she was a woman, her progress through the agency was really hampered. She was the right-hand man in all respects of Colonel Buckmaster, but she had a really hard time getting promoted on paper, getting paid more, getting an actual promotion rather than just having all this work piled on her, but she was still an assistant kind of thing.
They show it in the movie too. She wants her papers, she wants to be British, and they keep denying her appeal for that, and they do show it in the movie quite a bit. But again, they do so because they're trying to do so many things at once. None of it's really all that convincing to me, which is a shame because you can tell that they really tried, but they maybe tried a little bit too much.
For sure. It's too much. No, I agree.
So next, we get the bit we were talking about briefly before. Virginia's working away in her embassy job, but she's been rejected many times. And she meets Vera at the party, and soon Vera recruits her and Noor Inayat Khan, played by Radhika Apte, as a young radio operator. So this party, I thought, was kind of strange. They make it pretty clear that Jews aren't necessarily popular in Britain either. They have a little mention of that. And that makes Vera very uncomfortable, and she moves away and meets Virginia, who then later apologizes for being weird at the party, and I didn't really see that in the movie, so I was really quite confused about that.
One of the things, they obviously tried to write sort of a interweaving plotline for Khan and Hall in this movie, but one of the things I would have liked to see a bit more of was Hall, having worked as an ambulance driver before the fall of France in 1940, she had seen a lot of the terrible shit the Nazis were doing. She had been right there in the teeth of the German advance. And Khan, before her family fled from France, had seen the same thing. They'd had to evacuate Paris. She had seen bodies laying face down next to the road. And so both of these women were haunted by what they had seen of the German war machine. And that is part of what inspired them to get involved with this. So it would have been cool to kind of see that a bit more as they develop their camaraderie.
Yeah, and this is the first time the movie deviates from the actual history, because Noor and Virginia weren't at the SOE at the same time, because Noor didn't join until 1943, but she was a part of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, where she trained as a radio operator, and she was ultimately the first female radio operator sent into occupied France. And this lady was so strange and eccentric and interesting, and we watched documentaries and listened to podcasts, and she's just so interesting.
Yeah, there's a podcast called The Spy Who, and they have a 4-part series on Noor Inayat Khan, and it's so interesting, y'all. You should definitely listen to it. She was a person who wrote stories for children. Like, she had published some children's books, and yeah, she was raised as a pacifist, and she wanted to get involved in the war in a way that didn't involve killing. She had initially planned on being a nurse, but she thought that wouldn't be enough. And reading a lot of the reports on her, she was afraid of firing a weapon. A lot of people had misconceptions about sending her over there. And then when she went over, she performed super well, but she made mistakes where, because she wasn't fully trained, she may not have made those mistakes if she had more experience. And ultimately, a lot of these factors sort of got her killed. So her story is really sad, but she's such an interesting person.
I don't know if this is in a podcast because you listen to the podcast and I watched the documentary. But during her training, her final sign-off came from Leo Marx. And he apparently had to kind of adjust the way he taught her how to code because she didn't get it at first. And he was like, because she was also the woman who didn't lie. So she never lied. She didn't want to lie to the Germans. And he was like, all right, but you can't lie about the codes either, so they need to be real. And I thought this was so clever from Leo Marx, who's only 22 at the time. I didn't even know how to make my own dinner at 22, so...
Leo Marx was the codemaster at the SOE who also trained Violette Szabo. And yeah, clearly a guy who really knew what he was doing. He'll surface a bit later in the movie as well, but I guess we'll get to that. So there's a training montage. Virginia and Noor become friends. The torture scene that we saw at the beginning is revealed to be from Virginia's final test to complete her training. So it wasn't real. They're just putting them through this thing. Apparently in real life, Noor went through that as well. They dragged her into a room and they were like, who are you working for? Blah, blah, blah. In the dead of night kind of thing, drag you out of bed. So yeah, the training wasn't any joke. And the women got the same training as the men, same hand-to-hand combat stuff, same everything virtually, because they had to be able to survive in the same way that the men would have to survive in this completely hostile environment where everyone is gunning for you.
Yeah, and we also see a little bit of Noor's hesitation in this scene because she sees everybody else fighting and killing, and she's the one reading a book, not touching a weapon. So that's a little nod to her pacifism. Is that a word? Is that the word?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. Virginia, meanwhile, wants to be a badass. Apparently she put lipstick on this knife, and when they were doing fake killing, they had to go up behind a dummy and slash its throat. She slashed it with this knife that she had put lipstick all over, so it looked like it was bleeding. I'm like, okay, that's fucking intense, Virginia.
So Virginia does all this with her prosthetic leg, Cuthbert. I can't even pronounce the word. Cuthbert. It's so hard to pronounce. But just imagine just naming your leg.
Yeah. She was in a hunting accident and she got gangrene. So she had a wooden leg, which was why the Germans called her the limping lady. And despite that, despite her very obvious and familiar walk, they never caught her. So
Badass.
Yeah.
Finally, they get sent into action in Lyon, September 1941. It is Virginia who gets there first. She arrives in Vichy, France, and meets her contact, Dr. Chauvin, played by Rosie Sutherland. Virginia hits the ground running, as expected from her, organizing rescue for an injured colleague, doing recon and recruiting other resistance members. And this was true, too. For all I'm complaining about the movie does a pretty good job at getting most of the details right.
For sure. And also, may I mention, Rossif Sutherland is the son of famous actor Donald Sutherland and the half-brother of Kiefer Sutherland.
How did I not know this? I know this guy's doing other things, but I did not know this.
Well, I mean, I'm Canadian, and we know everyone who is Canadian, so...
Ask him to be in the podcast on if you know him.
Yeah, well, there's only 12 of us up here, you see, so we do all know each other. That's how I know Scott. Yeah, Lyon was a major center of French resistance in World War II. They paid a heavy price when the Allies landed. Many of the captured resistance members were executed en masse by the Germans to kind of set an example. And the resistance actually took over this nearby village called Villeurbanne for 3 days in late August 1944. Like, just imagine, these are civilians, and they take over this whole area from the Nazis. And then Lyon itself ended up being liberated by the Allies on September 3rd.
So the network in Lyon was called Prosper, I believe. It was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, networks in France. So it's huge.
Noor is about to be sent to France. They're in a situation where their last radio operator has been killed and they don't have a way to get information from their resistance circuits. And so they're like, we need to send someone in, and nobody is really prepared, but Noor is sort of less unprepared than everyone else. And a lot of people have reservations about sending her in, but Vera really believes in her. So she's about to be sent in. She's not fully trained, and she gets there and immediately police search her initial safe house and she makes a narrow escape. So action-packed straight away. And it's similar to what happened in real life. She met her contact and her contact's super jealous girlfriend, which tie a ribbon around that because it's relevant later. So she meets her contact, the contact's jealous girlfriend named Renee. And then she meets up with this other guy who's a radio operator, kind of like outside of town. She's supposed to be operating in Paris, I think, and he's like out in the sticks somewhere. But her radio hasn't landed yet. So she has to go and make contact with this guy. And then literally it's like her first or second day. And some guy comes running up and he's like, you gotta go. The Gestapo arrested the guy you just met and they're coming here. So she has to like bury the aerial in the ground so it can't be found and then fuck off out of there. And she doesn't know if her contact is burned. She doesn't know if these people that she's met have been compromised. It's a whole thing. It sounds super intense. I don't know how I would respond to it, but yeah.
And I feel like Noor was a very good radio operator, but she wasn't too aware of stuff going on around her. If you read her like training reports, and they all seem to think she's not too smart. Like she's really good at this job, but not social awareness or people, or she's got kind of a different kind of wiring almost.
Yeah, I think deeply naive might be one way to put it. There's a bit in the podcast where they talk about how when she first meets her contact in Paris, they told her it was going to be an old lady. And she shows up at the apartment with flowers and she's all ready and she's rehearsed her code message. She's ready to go. And then the person who opens the door is not an old lady, but a young man. And she completely forgets what she's supposed to say. She's like, oh, I think you're expecting me. And he's like, I don't know. Am I expecting you? And then basically because she looked scared shitless, he made her come inside. And then gradually they established that he was, in fact, the right guy that she was supposed to meet. But imagine if he had been a collaborator with the Nazis or just some guy. Like,
yeah, I just found her so interesting. I want to go and listen to the podcast. I feel like I'd eat that up.
You should. It's really interesting.
So we meet more new people. We meet a lot of people in this movie. We meet Father Robert Alash, played by Joe Doyle. And he also seeks out Dr. Chauvet for protection, since he is a well-known anti-fascist figure in France. And Virginia, who's with Dr. Chauvet still, they're kind of friendly at this point and working together. She's immediately suspicious of him. But she's overruled by London because London checks up on this guy and say, yeah, he's legit, he's okay, you can trust him.
Yeah. So Alesh was a Catholic priest who pretended to be an anti-fascist because he saw the opportunity to make money by infiltrating all these anti-fascist rings and working for the Germans. So he would basically encourage and foment resistance activities and then turn in the perpetrators. Like when cops set up a sting operation where they basically make the criminal do it and then turn them in. He became an Abwehr agent working directly for the Germans. He infiltrated the French resistance Gloria network in Paris, which as a result was destroyed. And afterward, he made contact with Virginia Hall, claiming to be an agent of Gloria and being like, oh, I have all this intelligence for you. So crazy, I'm the only one who survived. And she was like, that seems sus. But like you said, she got overruled. And many members of her network were captured and killed based on information that Father Alesh passed to the Germans. And he ultimately was executed by firing squad for his crimes in 1949.
Took a while, though. I wonder how many people died because of him.
Yeah, a lot.
I feel like that's a similar story to what we've read about the command line. It happened all the time. Double agents were freaking everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the U.S. gets involved in the war. And up until this point, Virginia has been using more or less her real identity. She's been going around and pretending to be a reporter. And now that the U.S. is involved in the war, obviously Americans are not going to be chill anymore. So she has to go deeper undercover and kind of switch up what she's been doing. Noor moves on to Paris to take up an even riskier post. So there's a good chunk of time where she is the only active radio operator in Paris. And meanwhile, back in England, Vera discovers that she's not going to get her citizenship paper. So as you said, this is kind of Vera's subplot. She's sort of criminally underrated by all of her colleagues and the people around her.
I was going to say, so she's got to fight for her right to party, but it's not to party. It's to be taken just the least bit seriously.
Yeah, right?
Also, I love Noor's cover story is that she's a kindergarten teacher. I feel like that's so fitting to who she was.
Well, she studied child psychology at the Sorbonne, I believe, before the war.
Oh, that makes sense. And you explained to me, I somehow didn't pick up on this, but cover stories and names are usually as close to real life as possible, so you don't have to lie as much. So you can't as easily get caught in a lie. And it makes sense, actually.
Yeah.
You've put in a little funny note here. It says, Virginia does leadership. Like, she goes full-on SAS work heroes and does some railway sabotage and helps the resistance guy escape from jail, and she's setting up a bunch of safe houses. So in the movie, we only get to see maybe one operation where she does a little railway sabotage, but in real life, she did many of these things all of the time. I feel like she took so many risks that other people wouldn't have taken.
Oh, yeah. She's straight up getting people out of jail. She's organizing weapons drops. She's organizing this resistance cell and that resistance cell. Like, this woman is involved in literally everything, and she's not afraid of, doing super dangerous shit. The whole thing where she's getting someone to smuggle things into the prison so these guys can escape, and then she sets up the safe house for them after. If you just arrive in France, a country in which you do not live and you're not maybe super familiar with, and you're like, yeah, I can do this task that requires an intimate knowledge of the locale.
I had heard of Virginia before because of the book you mentioned, but before that, there wasn't a whole lot known about her because she wasn't a lady who liked to talk about her exploits. So for a long time, people didn't know that she was this amazing woman, which is probably why there aren't any other movies about her yet. There's one in the pipeline somewhere that we're hoping gets made someday. So here's hoping.
Yeah, I think a lot of these guys after the war took their vow of secrecy really seriously. And so we're finding out in the past few years a lot of super old ladies who die. And then it turns out that they were in the SOE and they never told anybody.
Yeah, of course, the SOE files were restricted for a long, long time. But men are more likely to tell than women. Maybe women are just better at keeping secrets. Maybe that's why they make such good spies.
I also just think that nobody would have asked them, right? Like you're probably not asking your grandma what she did during the war, right?
No, you'd sooner ask your grandpa than you would your grandma because you just assume that your grandma was at home taking care of the kids.
Yeah, I think after the war too, a lot of these women got railroaded out of continuing in this line of work. I mean, we see it happened to Virginia, and it happened to a lot of the women involved where it was like, oh, well, there's no place for you in a post-war CIA or whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah, that's true too. I mean, they were still women in a time where women did not have it easy, but some of them didn't let that stop them. And these women are all prime examples of that. So I'm still really glad this movie's out there.
For sure. So we're still in Lyon. It's November of 1942 at this point. If you'll recall from our SAS Rogue Heroes episodes, November of 1942 was Operation Torch. The Allies are invading North Africa. And when Germany loses control of French North Africa, that's when they decide we're going to get rid of all pretense of there being this independent French government, and we're going to occupy the rest of France. And obviously, the Germans tightening their grip on France is not good news for our SOE agents. We see that Father Alesh is, in fact, working for the Nazis, including Klaus Barbie, who was known as the Butcher of Lyon, played by Mark Rissman in this movie. And Noor knows that she's in grave danger, but refuses to flee to safety. And at this point, a lot of Noor's compatriots had been picked up by the Gestapo. They knew that she was a woman of Indian descent. They knew her code name, Madeleine. They knew a ton of information about her. And they also had some of her friends in custody. And one of them, they got him basically at gunpoint to call her and be like, come meet me in this park. And she luckily knew that it was a trap, but the walls were closing in on her effectively. And the SOE decided at that point, like, we have to get her out of there. And she's like, I'm not going. I'm going to stay because I'm the only radio operator in Paris and someone has to do it.
Yeah, and they didn't just tell her once, right? It was a couple times that she just refused to evacuate. And I feel like part of that is being really brave and part of that is taking responsibility. But the other part is, like you said, maybe a bit of naivete.
Yeah, for her, she just didn't want to leave until there was someone else who could do what she could do. So she's like, well, you better finish training them and send someone new over. Until you do, I'm staying, because her job was so important. Klaus Barbie, head of the Gestapo in Lyon. He was known for personally torturing prisoners, which is why they called him the Butcher of Lyon. And then after the war, he assisted the US with anti-communist activities, and they helped him escape to South America, where he advised the dictatorial regime in Bolivia on repressing opposition and probably assisted in a military coup in 1980. So he lived a nice, long, free life. Thank you, USA. And then he was eventually caught and convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity, and he died in prison in 1991.
You can't see this podcast, but I'm just leaning my head on a microphone, being really disappointed with America right now.
Yeah, the US government actually apologized in the 80s for helping him get away and escaping justice.
Well, that didn't save anybody, did it?
No, it really didn't. And it didn't prevent Klaus Barbie, a terrible person, from living a long and fruitful life where he helped more people get hurt in South America.
Boo. All right, now we've done that. Virginia is known to the Gestapo, and they are looking for her, as we said. They find her very dangerous, and they want to catch her really badly. Dr. Chauvin is arrested. This made me very sad. One of her other compatriots is shot practically in front of her. The scene was awful, but she has to act like she doesn't know him. So she walks past him in the movie as he's on his knees, surrounded by German officers or SS officers specifically. And she just has to keep going and she can't stop. And it's so bad. But then, thankfully, when she's trying to get out, she goes to buy a train ticket. And there's a train ticket guy in the booth. And he's watching her and he's looking at his little hit list of people that they're looking for. And he sees her and he clocks her and he looks at her. And then all he says is, bon courage. And it's the best part of the entire movie. I agree with you. That's your note. But I agree.
Yeah. I love the small everyday acts of resistance and courage from people. I mean, that always gets me.
Makes you wonder how many other people he's said the same thing to while looking at his little hit list.
Yeah. Dr. Chauvin, I don't think was a real person, but Virginia did have 3 men, I think, that she worked with quite a lot in France that she called her nephews, sort of jokingly. And if I'm not mistaken, all 3 of them were captured and killed by the Germans. And she did spend a lot of time trying to get them out and couldn't.
It's so tough, man. I don't understand how, in general, like, resistance and SOE got people out of jail so often. I mean, more often they failed, but the things they did to get them out are pretty risky. They're risking the lives of many people to get one person back out. It's a pretty scary operation to do.
But, I mean, because the resistance was getting caught and infiltrated by the Germans so often, they just really couldn't afford to not do that, I think. There's a bit in the podcast where they're talking about how Noor at one point is basically one of the very few people left in a circuit. And she's trying to recruit new members of the resistance based on people that she knew growing up, because she grew up in France. Imagine you're having to try and recruit other spies on the fly based on people you haven't spoken to in like 15 years.
Yeah.
Noor gets snitched on and arrested. And earlier when I said, put a ribbon around jealous Renee, the girlfriend of Noor's first resistance contact in Paris, well, Renee didn't like Noor. And now we think maybe she was a little jealous of Noor around her boyfriend. And she contacted the Nazis and was like, I can give you this lady you're looking for in exchange for 100,000 francs, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's really like buy a few new nice dresses money. It's not even that much money. It's not 30 pieces of silver. It's like giving someone $500. And the Nazis were like, oh yeah, no problem. You can have your 100,000 francs. You sure drive a hard bargain. And yeah, because of this woman, Noor gets arrested. And it's awful because of her incomplete training, she misunderstood this thing that they had told her about filing all of your codes. And she thought that she was supposed to write them down. So she had this notebook full of codes that had a lot of incriminating information in it. And she was on her last day in France. The SOE were going to fly her out. She only had to make it uncaptured for one more day. The Gestapo were closing in, but she could have just hid out somewhere and kept her head down. But she knew that that book of codes that could get a lot of people killed was in her apartment. So she was like, well, I got to risk it. So she went back to her apartment, and that's when she got caught.
Jesus.
Yeah. Once she gets caught, the Germans have her radio and all of her codes. So now they can transmit as her back to London. And Leo Marx, played by Alistair Brammer, suspects that the Germans are transmitting using her code, but he gets overruled. So what had happened was before the war, before she went in, well, not before the war, but before she went into France, he was like, if you ever transmit to me a sentence of exactly 18 characters, I will know that you are compromised. And she's like, okay, I will never send you a sentence with 18 characters in it, like ever. So he gets this transmission from quote unquote Noor, and there's a sentence in it that's 18 characters. And he's like, I know that's not her. She wouldn't do that. And everyone else is like, yeah, but remember how she used to make all those mistakes in training? And he's like, she would not make this mistake. And they were like, it's probably fine. Like, we'll keep an eye on it, but it's probably okay. So months go by where they're getting these transmissions from quote unquote Noor, and they're starting to trust her again. They send in all these new agents that parachute in, and they get delivered right into the arms of the Gestapo, of course. And that's when they know for sure that Noor has been captured and she's going to be disappeared. So the Germans had this thing called Nacht und Nebel, which means night and fog. And it was a directive issued by Adolf Hitler on the 7th of December, 1941. Basically, whenever the Gestapo picked up political activists, members of the resistance, that kind of stuff, they would disappear them. And their idea was that they didn't want your family and friends to know what happened to you, because that creates this atmosphere of fear and not knowing. And that would make people be less likely to act out against the regime.
And also, the other thing would be that if they didn't know what had happened to you, they could misuse your identity like they did with Noor. So that's the other one. And I'll give you the full German pronunciation just for fun. It's Nacht und Nebel.
There you go.
And it's pretty horrible. Like, it's such a almost poetic way of being very evil.
Yeah. And unfortunately, part of the reason why Noor got caught in the first place was because of the same kind of thing. There was 2 Canadian agents that got picked up, and these 2 French agents managed to escape. They had the radio in the back of their car, and they're like, we need to destroy this radio so that the Germans can't radio back to London, pretending to be these 2 Canadians that they caught. So the one guy drove the car as hard as he could into a barrier to try and blow it up. Unfortunately, the car was not destroyed. The Germans were able to retrieve the radio. They were transmitting back to London as these 2 Canadians. London was none the wiser. And so it was these quote unquote 2 Canadians who were like, oh, send Noor to this place at this time, do this and that. Sure, parachute people here. And so part of the reason why Noor got caught was this exact same kind of thing had happened to some other agents.
It's so horrible, but a slight deviation, I think, from real life in the movie with Noor is that it's not her female friend that rats her out, it's the boyfriend who does it. So I wonder why they changed that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe they didn't want to, be, I don't know, not support women or something, because the girlfriend or the friend is actually, she feels sorry as soon as it happens. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that friend is a different person from Renee. They're not the same person.
No, right, but they could have used that story, right?
Yeah. I mean, Noor did have, like I said, she did have lots of friends in Paris from when she had lived there, and she did periodically make contact with those people, but she wouldn't have stayed with them because she knew that it was super, super dangerous. Like, if she got caught, everyone would get shot.
Yeah. So meanwhile, Virginia also still has to get the fuck out of Dodge, and she hikes to safety via the Pyrenees, which is a hellish journey, and also she's got a wooden leg, so good luck on that. Her entire circuit had been compromised at this point, and SOE won't send her back into action, so she needs to get a job with the RSS instead. But first she has to make it back, and it's a tough journey. And there's actually a funny little anecdote here to do with her leg, Cuthbert, because she was trekking over the Pyrenees, kind of having a hard time, and she radioed the SOE, and was saying, Cuthbert is giving me trouble. So SOE didn't realize that she had named her leg that. They thought she meant an actual person. So they replied that if Cuthbert was being problematic, she should probably have him eliminated.
Funny. I'm sure she got a kick out of that.
I'm sure.
Vera finally gets her papers. It's 1944 at this point, I think. Though she does get thoroughly razzed for not predicting that Father Alesh would sell them out, because I believe she was the one who sort of checked into his background. She and Virginia, who is now back, must go tell Noor's mother of her death. And it's, man, like, I just cannot overstate how much of a bummer this scene is. They go tell this poor woman that her daughter has died, and they're outside of the house, and this lady closes the door, and all of a sudden she just lets out this like guttural, heart-wrenching scream because her child is dead, and it's brutal. And then we see Noor's death play out. We see her executed in Dachau concentration camp.
And we also hear her final words as they were recorded, or it's not sure that she said this, but that final word was liberté, so freedom.
Yeah, the Nazi who killed her passed that story along. So that's charming.
Nice. I say nice very sarcastically, guys. I don't ever think a Nazi is nice.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a quote from the Persian poet Rumi that gets repeated throughout the movie. Noor's mother, I think, says it to her at one point. She says it to Virginia. And then when Virginia goes to see Noor's mother after her death, she repeats it back to her. And it's, don't you know yet? It's your light that lights the world. And that just made me very sad.
And Noor's name, Noor's first name and her full name, I think it's Noor Anissa or something, means light among women. So that's literally a reference to that. So while Bill Donovan, played by Matt Salinger, has a little cameo where he tells Vera that they're sending Virginia back into the field with a new radio operator training. So she's joined the OSS, so she gets to be an agent again, just not for the SOE.
Yeah. They've gone to school on the British a little bit. Obviously, this was a totally new kind of warfare. And so the British had learned a lot through trial and error, which unfortunately was very costly in the price of human life. And so they sort of changed the way they were doing things, where they were going to have much smaller cells of 3 people, and they would have a radio operator in each cell. So they wouldn't be so reliant on this one person who was so easy for the Germans to catch.
Yeah. Did we see Wild Bill Donovan in The Catcher Was a Spy?
He was in The Catcher as a Spy, yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. I just couldn't remember. But yeah.
And we get some super long end cards. After returning to France, Virginia Hall helped organize and arm 3 resistance battalions and reported on the enemy by wireless. Klaus Barbie never caught her. Virginia's betrayer, Father Alesh, was executed by the French. Cited for her rare courage, Virginia was the only civilian woman awarded the U.S. Distinguished Service Cross in World War II. Cuthbert, her prosthesis, is memorialized on a Congressional Gold Medal. After the war, Virginia tried again to become a diplomat. She was rejected. Later, she became the first female agent for a new spy organization, the CIA.
Yeah, wow. She didn't have a very good time at the CIA, though, right? It wasn't easy for her being in the CIA.
Yeah, she worked there until she retired. They ended up naming a training facility after her in 2017. It's the Virginia Hall Expeditionary Center, but it really took a long time for her to get recognition. And her colleagues even acknowledged that she was often overlooked for promotion and recognition because she had such a significant amount of experience and skill set that her superiors didn't have. They were intimidated by her. A lot of the men that she worked with didn't want to take her seriously because they knew that she knew more than them.
You're smarter than us. We don't like you now.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, right?
Yeah. Is this still the end card?
Oh, yeah.
My God, it's long. I've already forgotten how long it was. So the second part of the end card has to do with Vera Atkins. Vera Atkins was honored by the British and the French, as was our section head, Colonel Buckmaster. By D-Day, hundreds of their spies working with the resistance and the Allies were running missions. Tempted by the large number of spies missing at war's end, Vera spearheaded an investigation into their fate. She visited concentration camps, interrogated Nazi officials, and participated in war crime prosecutions. Vera confirmed all but one had died. She said, "I could not just abandon their memory." F-Section's war contributions came at a devastating cost. About 1 in 3 agents sent to France died, including 13 of Vera's 39 female agents. That number, man, is so harsh.
Yeah, there is some thought that she may have been so invested in doing these investigations after the war out of a sense of guilt because there was an inquiry, right? They said that her and Buckmaster should have known that a lot of these circuits were compromised. They should not have kept sending new agents in when they didn't know what had happened to the last ones. And I think there's sort of there's a fine line to be walked between they're in a wartime situation, they're making decisions on the fly based on very little information. And then at the same time, maybe they were a little reckless. And so though she never admitted to making any mistakes, you can tell from her actions that she probably felt a little responsible.
Yeah, I read a little article about her saying that she went to Ravensbrück and interrogated one of the executioners who helped identify Viola Tabo for one, and the 3 or 2 other agents also executed at the same time. But this lady, she was determined to just get every single answer that was out there. It just makes me wonder what happened to the one that she couldn't find. There was only one.
Noor Inayat Khan was captured less than 4 months after she arrived in France. And I've put here, I think the way they word this undersells it a little bit. I think that really, rather than captured less than 4 months after she arrived in France, which doesn't sound that impressive, it's she evaded capture for more than 3 months at a time when the Germans were getting better and better at detecting transmissions. And the lifespan for an undercover radio operator was 6 weeks. And even her colleagues back in London were suitably impressed by the fact that she had survived so long that she was still transmitting every day. She sent 120 messages during that time that she was over there. So she never missed sending a message. Just super, super impressive. And this lady, man, after she got picked up by the Germans, she tried to escape twice. They had her in solitary confinement, chained ankles and wrists for like 10 months because this little 100-pound lady scared these guys so bad. And when they took her to Dachau, they had tortured her. She didn't give anybody up. And they put the whole weight of the Nazi war machine on this poor woman, and she didn't break. And the fact that her last word was liberté, to me, is just like so impressive,
And to think, coming from the woman who struggled in her exercises and on her mission to keep her cover and not to freak out, it's pretty impressive that she didn't give anyone up.
Yeah. The end cards continue. She was in prison for 10 months before being murdered at Dachau. Noor has been commemorated as Britain's first Muslim war heroine. She was awarded Britain's George Cross for refusing to abandon the, quote, most dangerous post in France and declining to give up any information to the Nazis. France honored her bravery with its Croix de Guerre. And as you said, Noor, a name of Arabic origin, means light. In real life, Noor and Virginia's time as active agents in France did not actually overlap, so they would not have been in training together. I don't think that they ever met each other, or at least not that I could find. Noor was dropped into France in June of 1943. She was arrested 4 months later, and then she was executed on September 13th the following year. And Virginia was in France from August 1941 to November 1942, so before the time that Noor was there. And then she didn't come back until March 1944, after Noor had already been arrested. And then she stayed through until the end of the war. I don't mind the change in this movie that they had their paths crossed and had them have a relationship. I mean, I don't think it hurt anything.
No, I also don't mind it. I think it's good for storytelling purposes, except I feel like people might not look into the real story. Maybe because the rest of it is fairly accurate already. Like, you get a feel that they're telling true stories in this movie. But, like you said, I don't know if it really hurts anyone. I don't think it does. And it doesn't really hurt her memory either. I feel like she would have been friends with pretty much anybody. She seemed like a friendly little girl, almost. I keep referring to her as a little girl, even though she's a woman.
Yeah, she was like 30.
Yeah, she was 30 when she was executed, yeah.
The only thing is that I saw a review where they were talking about how they were like, well, obviously Khan's plotline was less interesting because she was just sitting around like tapping messages in Morse code. And I was like, honestly, that's how I know this movie didn't do her story justice, because I listened to this 4-part podcast earlier and rapt attention, man. It was so interesting. She was constantly almost getting caught and having to come up with new and creative ways to transmit. Her adventure was, I think, overshadowed by all this stuff that Virginia Hall did in the movie. And in real life, I think it's much more interesting than that.
I wonder, too, if the fact that the actress who plays Virginia has a producer and a writer's role, if that affects her part in the story. a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it does. And I mean, I guess the other perspective is she could have just written a movie about Virginia Hall and not included Khan at all, you know?
Right. I feel like I'm hopeful that we'll get more movies of women in World War II. I feel like we deserve them. And people are dying, man. We need to tell these stories before the people that knew anything about it are dead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and during the period of 1944 and 45, which is the part that doesn't really get covered in the movie, Hall was really instrumental in readying France for the D-Day landings. Like I said earlier, this woman was everywhere, involved in everything. And then she was building up anti-Nazi fighter groups in the mountains of Austria right towards the end of the war. And that's actually where she met her husband, fellow OSS agent Paul Goliot.
How romantic, just both fighting Nazis.
Right?
Right. I love doing the research for this. It's kind of influenced how I feel about the movie a bit. Speaking of which, we probably need to rate the movie.
Yeah, we definitely need to rate the movie. Should we rate it Cuthberts out of 10?
Yes, we definitely can.
I'm not choosing words that you find difficult to say on purpose.
Are you sure?
Well, maybe a little.
Yeah, it's funny anyway. I'll start because I want to start today. I'm rating this movie, I don't know, 7 Cuthberts out of 10. I like it more for the stories it tells than the way it tells the stories. So I'm really glad these women get some light shine on them. What's the word? Some light, some shine shown.
Oh my God! Now you're making me second. Light Sean on them. Yeah, Sean. Jesus.
I'll change the sentence. I'm really glad that these women get a little spotlight. I just wish that they'd gotten a slightly better spotlight overall. It's all right. Like I said, I enjoyed myself and I enjoyed researching specifically, but I just feel like it would do much better as a limited series or just a movie focused on one of the 3 ladies. So the acting was fine. The storytelling wasn't bad, but it kind of deserved a little bit more depth and emotion. There's only a couple scenes that were really emotional, but I would love to have seen a little bit more motivation in this. And there's a lot of exposition through radios and all that sort of stuff, but there's not a lot of motivations in this. So I would like some more, please. How about you?
Yeah, I think that all of these women were, I don't want to say eccentric because that could have a negative connotation. They were all characters. They were all larger than life in their own way. They were all just extraordinary. And I think that you could definitely devote a movie or, like you said, maybe make a limited series where you devote a lot more time to each of them and you get to know them as people because they are so interesting. And I think because that didn't happen, it did lose some emotional impact. When I listened to the 4-part miniseries on Noor Khan, I cried at the end. You know, it was just hearing about this woman that the Nazis couldn't break. She's a children's writer. You know, no one would have expected it of her. And then in the movie, I just didn't have the same kind of emotional impact for me. But I agree. I had a really good time researching. And sometimes with these movies, it's kind of no fault of their own, but they get so absorbed in the importance of telling this story because maybe this is the only movie that gets made about female spies. You know, we know all about how much work Kate Winslet had to put in to get the Lee movie made because this is kind of a genre where there's not a ton of content out there where there are female leads and female main characters and female protagonists. So I think that a lot of the times these movies get caught up in, you know, the importance of telling the story over the content of the story itself. So I'm going to say, I'll give it a 6.5 out of 10. I don't think it was a bad movie, but like you said, I think it could have been better. For me, I think the back half was more interesting than the first half. It kind of picked up a lot. There was a lot more action-y stuff happening. But yeah, I really loved to see a lot more depth and breadth about these women.
I feel like that's the exposition part they do in the first maybe half hour, 45 minutes. It's all just telling people lots of stuff instead of showing people. And the second half kind of does a better job at showing you what's going on. So maybe that's why.
Yeah, you're probably right. That sounds right.
everything.
Oh shit, what am I reading? Oh wait, did I start a new book on my phone?
She's gone to get her entire stack of books. I mean, how many books are there in your stack currently?
A lot. We don't have to talk about it. Oh.
We don't talk about Bruno, no.
Well, I bought a book about Dieppe that got stolen off my porch. So I've ordered a new one, but I don't have it yet. But
Rude!
right? Who would steal a $7 used book off my porch? Like, if you want to read it that bad, ask me if you can borrow it. So I've just got this other new one, well, new to me, called The Women Who Flew for Hitler, a true story of soaring ambition and searing rivalry by Claire Mully, who also wrote Agent So. So excited to dig into this one.
Did you finish Agent So?
I'm not done it yet, but I've half read like 47 different books recently, so I will circle back.
I feel like I'm in the same boat/book all the time. I keep reading the same. I'm reading 3 books at the same time, which is why I haven't finished either of them. But I need to hurry the fuck up.
Yeah, get on it.
Thank you everyone for listening once again to Rosie the Reviewer. You can share this episode with a friend, and you can find us wherever you get your podcast, because I forgot to say it just now. You can also follow us on Instagram if you like. We're pretty nice. And what else? You can find more information like the podcast we listen to and the documentary we've seen on our website, rosieTheReviewer.com. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.